When German generals first faced American artillery on the battlefields of Europe, many were shocked, some even described the experience as worse than hell. It wasn't a figure of speech. They meant it literally. The scale, intensity, and relentlessness of the firepower left a deep psychological impact on both soldiers and commanders. German defensive positions, meticulously planned and fortified over months, could be obliterated within minutes. Bunkers collapsed, trenches filled with debris, and every natural cover that soldiers had relied on suddenly became useless. The Americans didn't just fire artillery. They dominated the battlefield with it. And that domination reshaped how German generals understood modern warfare. One of the first things that struck German officers was the sheer volume of rounds that American artillery could deliver. Unlike many German batteries, which were often smaller and slower to reposition, American units had a staggering number of guns ready to fire at once. Batteries could unleash massive barrages that seemed unending, with explosions occurring in waves that gave no time for soldiers to regroup or respond. The sound alone was terrifying, a constant roar that drowned out every other noise on the battlefield, from cries of soldiers to the rumble of tanks. Officers reported that even experienced troops, hardened by years of combat, were stunned by the intensity and consistency of the bombardments. Accuracy was another element that made American artillery so feared. It wasn't just random shelling meant to harass or suppress enemy troops. Forward observers, coordinated spotters, and sophisticated range calculations allowed American units to hit specific targets with terrifying precision. German bunkers, machine gun nests, and supply points that were thought to be safe suddenly became vulnerable. Entire sections of defensive lines could be destroyed before the Germans had a chance to react. For generals who had spent years planning defensive positions and counter-battery strategies, this precision was both humbling and horrifying. It became clear that these weren't just powerful weapons. They were instruments of systematic destruction designed to break morale as much as the enemy's defenses. The psychological effect of the bombardments cannot be overstated. Soldiers under sustained American artillery fire reported feeling trapped and exposed, as though the earth itself had turned against them. Night and day, the bombardments seemed unending, leaving little opportunity for rest, planning, or counterattacks. Generals noted that their men were exhausted, demoralized, and often paralyzed by fear even before the infantry or armor arrived. This relentless pressure wasn't just physical. It was mental. A constant reminder that the Americans could strike anywhere, at any time, and with devastating efficiency. Mobility and responsiveness also contributed to the sense of overwhelming force. American artillery units could quickly relocate, set up, and open fire, keeping German troops off balance. Unlike heavier German guns, which could take hours to move and redeploy, American units were designed to be flexible. They could adapt to changing battle conditions, respond to intelligence in real time, and maintain continuous pressure on enemy lines. For German generals, this meant that even when they thought they had found a safe position or had stabilized a front, another barrage could render it untenable within minutes. Ultimately, the combination of volume, accuracy, mobility, and psychological impact made American artillery a force unlike any the Germans had experienced before. It wasn't just a weapon system. It was a strategy of constant dominance, designed to break not only fortifications but the will of the soldiers inside them. German officers quickly learned that traditional defensive tactics were often ineffective against such sustained firepower. What seemed like a straightforward battlefield problem became a nightmare scenario, leaving generals scrambling to adapt to a new reality where artillery could truly be described as worse than hell. In the end, the fear inspired by American artillery wasn't about the technology alone. It was about the total package. Overwhelming numbers, precise targeting, relentless tempo, and the ability to maintain pressure over hours and days. For German commanders, it was a brutal lesson in the power of fire, coordination, and psychological warfare, and it forever changed how they viewed combat in the European theater. What made American artillery truly terrifying to German generals wasn't just the sheer destructive power. It was the way it was coordinated, integrated, and deployed. It was a machine that worked as a system, not just as a collection of individual guns. On the battlefields of Europe, German commanders were accustomed to powerful weapons, but they were often limited by slower communication, fragmented coordination, and logistical challenges. American forces, on the other hand, had mastered the art of combining firepower, intelligence, and timing into a seamless operation that left their enemies struggling to respond. The efficiency of this system was nearly as overwhelming as the explosions themselves. Forward observers and spotters were a key element. These men were trained to locate enemy positions, track movements, and call in artillery strikes with precision that German units found astonishing. Rather than relying on guesswork or area bombardments, American artillery could hit specific targets, command posts, supply depots, machine gun nests, with deadly accuracy. German soldiers noted that positions they considered safe or well camouflaged were being destroyed in ways that seemed impossible. The battlefield felt smaller, more exposed, and far more dangerous than it had ever before. For generals responsible for planning defensive lines and anticipating enemy action, this level of coordination was disorienting, if not outright frightening. Integration with infantry and armor was another game-changer. American artillery wasn't operating in isolation. It moved in sync with other units, supporting advances, covering retreats, and creating opportunities for exploitation. Barrages were timed to soften enemy defenses before infantry moved in or tanks advanced, ensuring maximum effect with minimal delay. German commanders saw this as a level of sophistication that went far beyond their own practices, where artillery often lagged behind or was used more reactively than proactively. The Americans had mastered the concept of combined arms, and artillery was the beating heart of that system. Pre-planned barrages also added to the sense of inevitability. German generals were frustrated to discover that many artillery strikes seemed to anticipate their movements, as if the Americans already knew where they would be. This wasn't magic. It was meticulous planning, mapping, and intelligence work. Target coordinates were calculated, communication lines were established, and timing was rehearsed to perfection. What struck German commanders was how predictable this system made American action appear, even though the execution was precise and lethal. Each barrage reinforced the sense that resistance was almost futile, and that the Americans could strike anywhere at any time with devastating effect. The speed of American artillery was equally significant. German units, though capable of powerful strikes, often required hours to reposition, calibrate, and prepare. American units could move quickly, set up, and fire in a fraction of the time, maintaining pressure on German lines with little opportunity for reprieve. For soldiers and officers alike, this meant there was no safe moment to reorganize or recover. The pace of the bombardments, combined with their accuracy and coordination, created a psychological strain that compounded the physical destruction. German generals realized that the challenge wasn't just the power of the guns. It was the unrelenting tempo of the system behind them. Ultimately, German commanders recognized that the Americans had not simply built more powerful artillery. They had designed a complete operational philosophy around it. It wasn't enough to have guns. It was how those guns were used, integrated with other forces, and maintained under the stress of combat that made them so deadly. This systemized approach created a battlefield environment where chaos was imposed on the enemy with precision, and the Germans struggled to adapt. What made American artillery worse than hell wasn't the individual shell or round. It was the total combination of speed, coordination, planning, and integration. The Germans faced weapons that could strike anywhere, anytime, and in perfect synchronization with the rest of the army, leaving little room for defensive maneuvering. By the time a German general realized what was happening, the damage was already done. Lines broken, morale shattered, and options limited. It was a lesson in how warfare had evolved, and one that left a lasting impression on those who faced the relentless efficiency of American firepower. In the end, the fear German generals had of American artillery wasn't simply fear of explosions. It was fear of a system that combined technology, planning, and execution in a way that made survival, retreat, or counterattack extraordinarily difficult. This holistic approach to battlefield dominance demonstrated that artillery's deadliest power was not only in its destructive capacity but in the intelligence, organization, and ingenuity that directed it.